Fear is something that we all must deal with at some point in our lives. For some, fear is something they come into contact with fairly seldomly. For others, it can infiltrate the mind to the point of dysfunction, or in extreme cases, even destruction. A very common anecdote is face your fears, but for most people, particularly those who experience fear indefinitely, this is much easier said than done. But where does fear come from? Didn't Master Yoda once recall something like,
"Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering."
See, we've always been taught to be fearful of fear. How does one even begin to face their fears, when even the thought of fear is enough to scare us? Forms of neuroses like anxiety and depression are increasing rapidly in Western culture, and there's much evidence to suggest that fear is prevalent across the board. Where this fear derives from, however, is still a matter for discussion. When we look at anxiety, for instance, primitively, it's a fear of danger. But what does this mean in a more ultimate sense? Existential thinker Paul Tillich writes that anxiety involves apprehension about the ultimate meaning of life and death. What this tells us is that this fight or flight primal instinct has transcended beyond its evolutionary origin. In the Western world, we no longer fear a predator, rather the things that we consider to be a threat to our way of life. So, how do we fight our fears? This essay will focus on the use of therapy. In Jung, we learn of Freud's discovery that the cause of the illness is not removed with the suppression of the symptom, and the symptom is far more a kind of signpost pointing directly or indirectly to the cause. What this suggests is that our fears are likely to be the symptom of a far more deep-rooted problem. In the 1940s, Abraham Maslow realised that issues of this nature would require a new lens from which to observe. One that allowed researchers to dive deeper into the human mind, less limited than previous psychological models. This area would soon become known as humanistic psychology, which held the belief that all humans were inherently good people and encouraged a positive view of the self, with a particular emphasis on personal growth. Emerging from this new wave of research was the field of transpersonal psychology. Michael Daniels writes in his book Shadow, Self, Spirit, Essays in Transpersonal Psychology that transpersonal literally means beyond or through the personal. What this means in a practical sense is to transcend the egoic self. Hang on a minute, psychology? This sounds a lot like spirituality to me. Well, you wouldn't be entirely wrong. Transpersonal psychology seeks to examine the deeper connections between the body and soul. You could even argue that the transpersonal is just a Western attempt at understanding Eastern spirituality, or perhaps more specifically, shamanism, the act of spiritual healing. Well, shamanism burst through the seams of academic psychotherapeutic culture in the 1940s, which began raising more questions regarding the psychology of the human mind. The subject was largely rejected by scientists,
Drink my urine first thing in the morning,
claiming that it lacked a scientific grounding. However, it's also argued by the likes of Michael Daniels, Daniel C. Dennett, Abraham Maslow, and B. Alan Wallace, to name a few, that the objective world of science recedes as we close in on the subjective world of consciousness, on what it's like to be a conscious being. Science can only show us what's happening inside the brain. It can't tell us what consciousness means. Michael Daniels extrapolates a model stating that a truly scientific transpersonal psychology must be based on 1. The collection of all relevant evidence where possible using empirical methods. 2. The attempt to understand transpersonal phenomena using terms, models, and theories that emphasize the role of psychological factors. 3. Putting these models and theories to critical test by examining whether their predictions are confirmed by further evidence. And 4. Communicating the knowledge obtained in appropriate ways to the scientific and wider communities. A common misconception about spirituality is its connection with religion. Whilst religion does exist within spiritual framework, the two can and should exist separately. Attractively put by Farias and Hentz, spirituality is a universal feature of human experience, addressing a feeling of transcendent force or presence, which need not be framed within any particular theological or belief system, but instead can rely solely on the individual's experience. This tells us that for you to be able to tap into this force, you don't have to be subscribed to a religious doctrine. It's accessible to everybody. But first, you have to have an open mind. The trouble that many who criticise the phenomena have is the notion of their reality being questioned. Well, my question's this: why do you trust reality so much? It's a known fact that animals can perceive the world differently to us. For instance, bats perceive their environment using echolocation, something that's far beyond our human physical capabilities. In Michaels and Corello, we're presented with the idea of indirect perception, meaning that the senses are provided with an impoverished description of the world. That is, the input does not provide accurate or complete information about objects and events. According to this theory, reality is relative. It's the human mind that's capable to perceive and remember its environment. But this is subjective, is it not? Stephen Mithin, in his anthropological study, The Prehistory of the Mind, brings our attention to an article written by Daniel Schachter in 1989, where he argued that, in addition to the subjective feelings of knowing, remembering, perceiving, consciousness should be viewed as a global database that integrates the output of modular processes. From this, I'd argue that the primary reason that we hold reality in such high esteem is because we're able to cross-correlate each of our perceptions to form a global consensus of what we believe reality to be. Who are we to say that what we perceive as reality is the right one, or the only one for that matter? Great, now that we're past the whole reality rubbish, let's get back to the transpersonal. Taylor and Pierre Dilato sketched the history of transpersonal development in America, where it was most predominant, highlighting Anthony Suttich and Abraham Maslow as the pioneers that sparked the humanistic and transpersonal movements of the 50s and 60s. The two came together in 1949, later founding the Journal of Humanistic Psychology in 1961, which was dedicated to a new psychology of the person that, among other things, valued altered states of consciousness and non-technological cultures, and recognised the relationship between self-realisation and spiritual healing. Following this, the duo founded the Journal of Transpersonal Psychology, whose aim was the study of self-actualisation, higher consciousness, values related to the actualisation of being, and the exploration of techniques associated with altered states of consciousness. Whoa, that was a mouthful. Let's just focus on one of these ideas at a time. Let's start with self-realisation. Much like the name suggests, it's realising who you are. Let's say you've just bought yourself a shiny new Aston Martin. Your partner just proposed to you. You got a promotion, or maybe even accepted onto your university course. In any case, life's great, and your newfound success and happiness is radiating through everything you do, say, and act. When asked, who are you? You might say your name, your age, and then talk about your job, your new engagement, etc.
So how about you? Are you seeing anybody?
Oh, not right now.
Oh, well, that's okay.
But what would happen if these things were suddenly stripped of you? What if you failed your degree, you lost your job, your partner unexpectedly left you, or worse, somebody keyed your car? Suddenly, your happiness diminishes, leaving you with a deep sense of sadness. It would hurt, of course it would. These are things you've worked at, and to attack these things would be to attack your very you-ness. But are you any less yourself without these things? Of course not. You wouldn't let debt, being single, dropping out of school, or owning a Nissan Cube stop you from being happy, would you? As the human race rapidly multiplies, the conception of identity is one that's become very important to us. The need to be unique and different from the rest.
Unique? Thank you for choosing Northam Robotics.
The likes of Sartre, Camus, Nagel, and other existentialists have pondered the question and concluded nothing, other than the simple fact that life has no meaning. At least nothing universal. Life is, therefore, absurd. Once we acknowledge this, we're able to let go of existential dread and find our own meaning and happiness in life. This overall lack of universal meaning has led us to seek personal meaning, that is, to construct an identity. While it's important to value your identity, it isn't all you are.
I don't want to lose what I got!
Surely there has to be more to us than what car we drive. Something independent of our identity that gives us meaning. Perhaps something deep within us that's the true source of our happiness. This is what spirituality and transpersonal psychology refer to as the self. You can only lose something that you have, but you cannot lose something that you are. At the heart of all transpersonal ideas lies a distinction between the conscious self and the ego. Put simply, the real goal of transpersonal psychology and inner growth is to free yourself of the constraints of the ego. This is what it means to realize oneself. What Abraham Maslow and other transpersonal psychologists recognized was the connection between self-realization and spiritual healing. The act of spiritual healing is, for all intents and purposes, a therapy. Perhaps the best way to present this phenomenon is to highlight, as Caroline Jung did, the difference between curing and healing. Curing is physical, alleviating the signs and symptoms of disease at an anatomic level. Healing, in contrast, is spiritual, intangible, and experimental, involving an integration of body, mind, and spirit. According to Burkhardt and Nagai Jacobson in Jung's book Spirituality, Health and Healing, spiritual care begins with presence. When we encounter another at the level of spirit, we open to the sacredness of the present moment. But what is it about presence that's so sacred? Well, for instance, meditation is a practice that allows the one meditating to distance their conscious self from their egoic self by observing thoughts as they come and go, rather than giving those thoughts more life by overthinking. By focusing on the expanding and retracting motion of breathing, the meditator is able to exist completely free of the ego, inviting rational and coherent thought. Daniel N. Stern writes, "The position of the present moment along with the dimension of consciousness is essential if one is to consider how experiences occurring now can be remembered, reflected upon, verbalized, and narrated." For any form of therapy, it's of the utmost importance that the therapist, shaman, or healer gives their undivided attention to the client to ensure that true catharsis can occur. Stanley W. Jackson breaks down the word catharsis to mean the purification of the emotions by vicarious experience, especially through the drama, in reference to Aristotle's Poetics 6. And from the realm of psychotherapy, the process of relieving an abnormal excitement by re-establishing the association of the emotion with the memory or idea of the event which was the first cause of it, and of eliminating it by abreaction. Here, we arrive at a cathartic collaboration, as it were, between psychotherapy and drama to form a hybrid field whereby the dramatist and psychotherapist combine their skills to create an opportunity to explore the possibilities of drama therapy as a form of healing. What I wish to acknowledge here are the groundbreaking implications of Susanna Penzig's essay, Dramatherapy as a Form of Modern Shamanism. What particularly interests me regarding Penzig's analysis is the identification of role, stage, and performance. She suggests that the role in drama therapy serves the same function as meditation in spiritual practice. Penzig writes, "Unacceptable feelings and/or aspects of one's personality become easier to express and to accept through the distance and the freedom inherent in the act of playing somebody else." As we can see from this, the cathartic method, as it's referred to in psychotherapy, can achieve spectacular results when applied to patients with deep-rooted neuroses using theatrical methods. The job of the drama therapist is to help the client reimagine their pain and realise oneself. Drama therapists are able to do this by engaging with the patients in traditional devising techniques and exercises, such as tableau, mirroring, improvisation, etc., where the patient is then able to express themselves and articulate their pain in a way that the egoic mind may attempt to suppress. This particular method is extrapolated by Louis Barbato, using the rehabilitation of soldiers suffering trauma as an example, whereby the patient is given certain emotional situations to act out on the stage. The situation may be an immediate one facing the patient, or any of several likely to be experienced upon the return to civilian life. This brings me to the next part of Penzig's comparison, the stage. The stage refers to the specific place in which the healing act takes place. In shamanism, Penzig mentions, The performing area is made sacred in order for the healing to occur. The literal stage in dramatherapy possesses the same sacred power, that is, the power of the present moment. The third and most profound aspect of Penzig's analysis is that of the performance. The added layer of the audience is where the transcendence truly occurs, as the client is then able to achieve the same state of consciousness or similar as that which can be achieved through meditation. This is prevalent in actors' ability to suspend their disbelief when performing a character.
What I do is I pretend to be the person I'm portraying in the film or play.
She writes, although performers do not undergo a trance in the technical sense of the term, acting does involve a sort of disidentification from one's ego self. Coupled with the sacred power of the stage and role, that is, the ability to be fully present and still conscious, the client may self-actualize and detach from their emotional connection to the cause of neuroses. Similarly, Bruce Howard Bayley's work using symbolism in Indian mythology has been used in dramatherapy to treat addiction. Using the divided kingdom of Ayodhya to reflect the divided self, clients were facilitated to re-experience the sense of a lost time when all may have appeared to be well, an imagined golden age, which then developed into darkness and division within themselves. Through movement, small object protective play, story making and role play, clients have, in the constrained dramatherapy space, embodied and reenacted conflicts between polarized parts of themselves, subpersonalities, and gradually moved towards a sense of internal integration.
Now my life has meaning and purpose, and I love it.
Finally, I would like to bring attention to an implication made by Penzig that will serve as the crux of this essay. By sharing the therapeutic process with an audience, the experience acquires another dimension as the audience is also incorporated into it. This is one way in which performance can be said to have a transcending element, because its effects expand the group's psychological boundaries, perhaps even allowing its influence to permeate society at large. By applying Penzig's model of transpersonal dramatherapy, focusing on the audience as a means of mass therapy, a whole new realm of dramatherapy is revealed to us. Bringing the audience into the therapeutic practice could enable dramatherapy to reach broader audiences and, by extension, invite more people to participate in the cathartic process. I'd now like to return to a point I made earlier. Reality is relative. And the reason for this, I have argued, is that we as humans are able to cross-correlate our perceptions of reality to form a global consensus. So, using this logic, by suspending our sense of disbelief as audience members, we thereby open our minds to a different reality, one that has the ability to heal neuroses. On a global scale, if enough of us perceive this new reality, we may add it to the global database that Daniel Schachter alludes to, thereby forming a new global consensus, a new utopia. But this all begins in the present moment. The foundations for which all spiritual and transpersonal growth begins. I will end with the words of Eckhart Tolle. What you think of as the past is a memory trace stored in the mind of a former now. When you remember the past, you reactivate a memory trace, and you do so now. The future is an imagined now, a projection of the mind. When the future comes, it comes as the now. When you think about the future, you do it now. Past and future obviously have no reality of their own, just as the moon has no light of its own, but can only reflect the light of the sun. So are past and future only pale reflections of the light, power, and reality of the eternal present.